Today, Alex Jeffrey Preddy was shot by ICE agents. He was apparently murdered in the street after trying to help a woman up off of the ground that was pushed by an ICE agent. Mr. Preddy was armed, as is his Second Amendment right, with a permitted firearm. The current state of the federal coverage of this is claiming that he had planned to assassinate ICE agents. Now, Stephen Miller said this so early after the shooting took place that it's impossible that he could have had any idea what this man's motivations were. But just like in the case of Renee Good, the narrative is getting out ahead of whatever investigation might take place. Now, as far as an investigation is concerned, I don't have high hopes. DHS has basically claimed jurisdiction here, and I think the expectation of anything fair coming out of it is probably pretty limited. What a tragic and totally foreseeable thing that we've witnessed now. And this is the second time that I have started one of these recordings on a day where a American citizen was shot by an ICE agent. And the current statistic for Minneapolis is 66% of gun-related deaths in the city for 2026 have been perpetrated by ICE. So I hope Mr. Preddy's family is handling this, and I hope that our government can see through to some kind of justice for this man and his family, a man that apparently was just helping someone stand up after getting knocked over by an ICE agent. If you were a man of influence in 1776, if you were a merchant, a lawyer, or a general, you didn't just hang out at the tavern, you went to the lodge. The Freemasons are the boogeyman of every conspiracy theory on the internet. If you go on YouTube right now, you can find tens of thousands of hours of videos about how the Masons are worshiping Satan, hiding aliens, or running the world. But if you look at the actual history, the Masons weren't trying to hide the world. They were trying to build a new one. Washington, Franklin, Hancock, Revere, they met in secret, yes, but they met to discuss a radical new idea, that men could rule themselves. That authority didn't come from a king or a pope, but from reason and consent. The Masonic Lodge was the server room of the American Republic. It was the network where the software of liberty was written. We talked all about the Freemasons in a previous episode. But today, we're going to talk about a different lodge. It also meets in secret. It also has a membership that reads like a who's who of American power. It also coordinates the strategy for a nation. But this lodge wasn't built to create a secular republic. It was built to dismantle one. Hello and welcome back to The False Foundation. I'm Jim, and today we are going to walk through the doors of the Council for National Policy. We are going to peel back the heavy velvet curtains and look at the machine that has been running the American right for 40 years. And we are going to expose the single greatest lie in modern political history, the lie that the religious right is a grassroots movement of concerned moral citizens. It isn't. It is an intelligence operation. It is a top-down, funded and coordinated insurgency designed by one man who realized that if you want to control a democracy, you don't need more voters. You just need to control what the voters believe is true. This is the story of the Anti-Masonic Lodge. To understand the machine, you have to understand the architect. And the architect of the modern American theocracy wasn't a preacher. He wasn't a prophet. He was a statistician with a bad attitude. His name was Paul Weyrich. If you don't know that name, then you don't know how your country works. Paul Weyrich is the man who founded the Heritage Foundation. He also founded the ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council. He founded the Moral Majority. Basically, if there is a piece of infrastructure on the right today, Weyrich poured the concrete. But before we talk about how he built the machine, we need to talk about what he wanted to build, because there is a massive misconception about the conservative movement in this country. Most people think conservative means small government. They think it means individual liberty. They think it's about low taxes and getting the government off your back. That was Barry Goldwater. That was the old right. Paul Weyrich hated that. Weyrich wasn't a libertarian. He was a theocrat. He didn't want a government that was small. He wanted a government that was moral. And when he said moral, he didn't mean be nice to your neighbor. He meant order. He meant hierarchy. He meant submission. Weyrich looked at the social revolution of the 1960s, the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the gay rights movement, and he didn't just see politics, he saw a rebellion against God. And he believed that the role of the state was not to protect your liberty to sin. The role of the state was to crush the rebellion. This is where we have to be very precise with our language, because what Weyrich and his inner circle, men like Rousas Rushdoony and Howard Phillips, were proposing wasn't just republicanism, it was dominionism. If you served in the Middle East, you know what a theocracy looks like. You know what it looks like when a political party believes they have a divine mandate to enforce religious law on the population. We called it the Taliban. We called it Sharia law. Well, Paul Weyrich and his network looked at that level of control, and they didn't hate the system, they just hated the brand. They wanted a Christian version of Sharia. They believed in biblical law. Now, I'm not talking about the Golden Rule. I'm talking about the Mosaic Law. The inner circle of the CNP was heavily influenced by a theology called Christian Reconstructionism. Here is the core belief. Quote, democracy is a heresy. The rights of man are a myth. There is only the law of God. End quote. Their vision for America was terrifyingly specific. They envisioned a society where the death penalty was expanded to include homosexuality, adultery, and the rebellious children. They envisioned a society where public schools were abolished entirely because the education of children belongs only to the father. They envisioned a society where women were removed from the workforce and returned to domestic submission. This sounds like I'm making it up. It sounds like The Handmaid's Tale. But listen to Weyrich in his own words. He wrote a letter to his supporters where he said, quote, we are different from previous generations of conservatives. We are no longer working to preserve the status quo. We are radicals working to overturn the present power structure of this country. End quote. He wasn't trying to conserve the Constitution. He was trying to replace it. He viewed the Constitution, with its separation of church and state, as a mistake, a bug in the software. His goal was to patch that bug. So when I tell you that the Council for National Policy is a threat to democracy, I'm not using hyperbole. I am using their own definition. They don't believe in democracy. They believe democracy is mob rule by sinners. They believe in a republic of the righteous. In their vision of America, you don't get a vote unless you bow to their king. So Weyrich has this vision. He has the blueprint for a Christian theocracy. But he has a problem. The American people, even the Christians, didn't want that. The average guy in 1975 just wanted to go to work, drink a beer, and watch the game. He didn't want to stone his neighbor for adultery, so Weyrich realized he couldn't sell the end state. He had to sell the fear. Now, in a democracy, when your ideas are unpopular, you're supposed to change your ideas. Weyrich decided to change the electorate. In 1980, he gave a speech in Dallas that should be played in every history class in America. It wasn't meant for the public. It was meant for the inner circle. And in that speech, he said the quiet part out loud. He said, quote, I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by the majority of the people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections quite candidly goes up as soon as the voting populace goes down. End quote. That is the mission statement. I don't want everybody to vote. Weyrich realized that he couldn't win a fair fight, so he decided to build a machine that would ensure he never had to fight one. He realized that he needed an army of foot soldiers who would vote for corporate interests, not because it helped their bank accounts, but because they believed it was a moral imperative. He needed a way to bypass their brains and wire directly into their souls. He needed the evangelicals. But there was a problem. In the 1970s, evangelicals didn't care about politics. I know that sounds insane to say today, but it's true. The Southern Baptists were famously apolitical. They believed that the world was fallen, that Jesus was coming back any minute, and that getting involved in dirty Washington politics was a distraction from saving souls. Even worse, they didn't care about abortion. In 1971, the Southern Baptist Convention actually passed a resolution supporting the liberalization of abortion laws. They viewed it as a Catholic issue, not a Protestant one. So Weyrich had a demographic, millions of white Christians, but he had no way to activate them. He poked them with tax cuts, nothing. He poked them with deregulation, nothing. He needed a spark. He needed a grievance so deep, so visceral, that it would drag them out of the pews and into the voting booths. And this brings us to the false foundation. The myth you have been told, the myth that every news anchor repeats, is that the religious right formed in response to Roe versus Wade. You've heard the story. God-fearing Christians saw the Supreme Court legalize abortion, and they rose up in a moral panic to defend the unborn. It's a great story. It paints them as noble defenders of life. It's also a lie, a complete fabrication. In 1970, the Nixon administration began a crackdown on segregation academies. Throughout the South, white parents had pulled their kids out of public schools to avoid integration. They started private Christian schools, schools that were whites only, and for years the IRS gave these racist schools tax-exempt status. But in 1971, the court ruled in Green v. Connolly that you couldn't be a tax-exempt charity if you were violating federal civil rights law. The IRS sent a letter to Bob Jones University, the Harvard of fundamentalism, and said, integrate or pay taxes. That was the spark. It wasn't about babies, it was about money, and it was about race. Weyrich later admitted this. He told a historian, explicit, quote, "What got us going as a political movement was the attempt on the part of the IRS to rescind the tax-exempt status of Bob Jones University," unquote. Think about that. The foundation of the moral majority wasn't the sanctity of life, it was the sanctity of segregation. But Weyrich knew he couldn't sell segregation to the rest of the country. It was 1978. Being openly racist was starting to get bad for business. He needed a cover story. He needed a high moral ground that would justify their political aggression. So they tested issues. They tried the Equal Rights Amendment. They tried school prayer. And finally, in 1979, 6 years after Roe versus Wade, they settled on abortion. It was a branding exercise. They took a movement built to defend racist institutions and they rebranded it as a movement to defend life. And it worked. It worked better than Weyrich could have ever imagined. Once Weyrich had his army, he needed a headquarters. He needed a place where the billionaires, who wanted tax cuts, could meet with the pastors, who wanted to protect their segregated schools, and the activists, who wanted power. In 1981, he founded the Council for National Policy. The CNP is the Anti-Masonic Lodge. It operates on a cell structure. It meets 3 times a year at undisclosed luxury resorts. The Ritz-Carlton in Laguna Niguel, the Grand American in Salt Lake City. The rules of the CNP are strict. Rule number 1, you don't talk about the CNP. Guests are not allowed to tell the press they are attending. The membership list is classified. If you leak the proceedings, you're expelled. Why the secrecy? If these people are just patriots saving America, why do they need to meet behind armed guards and non-disclosure agreements? Because the things they talk about in those rooms are not things that you can say on CNN. Inside the CNP, you have the 3-legged stool of the right. Leg 1, the money, the DeVos family, which is Amway, the Prince family, or Blackwater, the Wilkes brothers, fracking. These are the oligarchs. Their goal is simple. Return the United States to the economic conditions of 1900. No unions, no EPA, no income tax. Leg 2, the muscle, the NRA, the Federalist Society, the Heritage Foundation. These are the operators. Their job is to write the laws and buy the judges. Leg 3, the mouth. James Dobson from Focus on the Family, Tony Perkins from the Family Research Council, Tim LaHaye from the Left Behind series. These are the messengers. Their job is to sell the oligarch's plan to the common man. I want to pause on that second leg, the muscle, because we need to understand a specific tactical decision they made in the early 80s. If you look at the Supreme Court today, you notice something strange. America is a majority Protestant country. The religious right is overwhelmingly evangelical, Baptists, Pentecostals, non-denominational. But the Supreme Court is overwhelmingly Catholic. 6 of the current justices have ties to the Catholic legal tradition. Why? Why would a movement driven by Southern Baptists and Charismatics hand the keys to the judiciary over to the Catholics? Because Paul Weyrich was a pragmatist. He did a capability assessment of his own forces, and he found a gap. The evangelicals brought the numbers. They brought the passion. They could fill a stadium, and they could intimidate a congressman. But historically, evangelicals were anti-intellectual. They didn't have a deep tradition of philosophy or constitutional law. They had passion, but they didn't have jurisprudence. If you send a fire-breathing Baptist preacher into a federal court to argue against Roe v. Wade using Bible verses, he's going to get laughed out of the room. But the Catholics, they had 2,000 years of canon law. They had Aquinas. They had natural law. They had an intellectual framework that could dress up theocracy in a suit and tie and call it originalism. So a deal was struck. A division of labor. The evangelicals would be the infantry. They would knock on doors, scream at school boards, and deliver the votes. The Catholics would be the officer corps. They would go to Yale and Harvard, write the law review articles, and staff the courts. This is where the Federalist Society comes in. Founded in 1982, right alongside the CNP, the Federalist Society became the farm team for this Catholic legal strategy. It's not a debate club. It's a placement agency. If you are a young conservative law student, the Federalist Society is your ticket to the show. They find you, they mentor you, they clerk you, and eventually they put you on the bench. And the litmus test isn't, are you conservative? It is, will you prioritize the church over the state? The results speak for themselves. Alito, Thomas, Roberts, Kavanaugh, Barrett, Gorsuch, they are all products of this pipeline. When you see them voting in lockstep on religious liberty cases, chipping away at the wall between church and state, ruling that a football coach can pray on the 50-yard line or that taxpayers must fund religious schools, you aren't watching random legal opinions. You are watching a military unit executing a mission that they were trained for 30 years ago. The brilliance of the CNP was getting the Southern Baptist voter to pull the lever for the Catholic judge. In the 1960s, those two groups wouldn't have shared a cab. Today, they share the government because the CNP taught them that they didn't need to like each other's theology. They just needed to hate the same secular world. I am not speculating here. Whether it's the billionaires, the judges, or the preachers, every name I just listed has been documented in the internal directories. The modern operators were confirmed in the membership rolls leaked to the Washington Post in 2020, and the founders, like LaHaye and Weyrich, are a matter of established public record. These aren't rumors, they're receipts. And this is where we get to the most dangerous weapon in their arsenal. I call it policy laundering. We talk about money laundering all the time. You take dirty drug money, run it through a car wash or a casino, and it comes out looking clean. The CNP does the exact same thing with ideas. Let's walk through the kill chain of a policy idea. Step 1, the input. Let's say you are an oil baron in the CNP. You have a problem. The Environmental Protection Agency is costing you millions of dollars in fines because you keep dumping sludge into the river. You want to gut the EPA, but you can't run a TV ad saying, I want to pollute the river. Voters hate pollution. Even Republican voters like clean water, so you take your problem to the CNP. Step 2, the translation. The oil baron hands the problem to the theologians at the Heritage Foundation or the Cornwall Alliance. The Cornwall Alliance is a CNP-affiliated group that specializes in environmental policy. They take the corporate goal, gut the EPA, and they translate it into biblical language. They come up with a concept called the Green Dragon. They argue that environmentalism isn't a science, it's a pagan religion. They argue that if you protect the earth, you are worshiping the creation instead of the creator. They write a curriculum called Resisting the Green Dragon. Suddenly, dumping sludge in the river isn't pollution, it is biblical dominion. It is resisting paganism. Step 3, the pulpit, the distribution. The CNP takes this new theological package and hands it to the pastors. Pastors all over the country receive the talking points and sermon guides for free. A pastor gets up on Sunday morning. He trusts these organizations. He reads the sermon. He tells his congregation, the Green New Deal is a demonic attack on God's sovereignty. If you vote for environmental regulations, you are bowing to the Green Dragon. Step 4, the grassroots. The congregation believes it. Why wouldn't they? They aren't listening to a lobbyist. They are listening to their shepherd. They get angry. They start calling their senator. They demand the EPA be defunded. The senator looks at the angry crowd and says, well, I have to listen to my constituents, and he guts the EPA. The oil baron gets his tax cut. The river gets poisoned, and the voter walks away believing they just won a major battle in the larger holy war. That is the machine. It turns corporate greed into religious zeal. It bypasses the brain and hacks the soul. And the CNP is the laundromat where it happens. This brings us to the present day, because the machine Paul Weyrich built in 1981 hasn't stopped. It has accelerated. And now it has evolved into something even more dangerous. We talked in the last episode about the status threat. We talked about the white Christian demographic is shrinking. The CNP knows this. In fact, they knew it before anyone else. They have the best data money can buy. They know that they cannot win a majority of the American people ever again. Gen Z is gone. The suburbs are drifting away, so they have shifted strategy. They are no longer trying to be the moral majority. They're trying to be a ruling minority. This is why you see the alliance between the reformed guys like Doug Wilson and the charismatic guys like the New Apostolic Reformation. Theologically, these guys hate each other. Doug Wilson thinks the charismatics are speaking gibberish. The charismatics think Wilson is a frozen, chosen intellectual. But inside the CNP, they are best friends. Why? Because of a doctrine called co-belligerency. This was Francis Schaeffer's idea. It basically means the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They both hate public education. They both hate the secular government. So they have agreed to put down their Bibles and pick up their swords. They have realized that if they stick together, if they fuse the intellectual strategy of the Heritage Foundation with the emotional fervor of the charismatic revival, they can seize the levers of power without having the votes. This is the false foundation. Everything you think you know about the culture war is a script written in a boardroom in 1981. The grassroots anger, manufactured. The biblical mandates, translated corporate policy. The persecution, a marketing tactic. We are living in a reality that was engineered by Paul Weyrich to ensure that you never, ever look at the man behind the curtain. He built a machine to make you look at drag queens while he picks your pocket. But knowing the history is only half the battle. You need to know the tactics. You need to know exactly how they are coming for your schools, your libraries, and your courts. Next episode on Tuesday night, we are going to open the field manual. We are going to map the cognitive kill chain. We're going to look at the specific 6-step operation that they are running right now to dismantle public education and transfer your tax dollars into their private network. We are going to name names. The Alliance Defending Freedom, the Wilkes Brothers, Project 2025. The machine is built. Tune in Tuesday to watch them turn it on. This has been False Foundation. I'm Jim. If you learned something, tell a friend. If you got mad, tell me. You can email me at jim@falsefoundation.com. I read everything, even the hate mail. If you want to join us, go over to patreon.com/falsefoundation. We'd appreciate your support. Thank you for listening.